I have lived in this small neighborhood for decades, where everyone knows each other. Every day I would encounter my neighbors, receiving friendly smiles, brief conversations, and sometimes small gestures, like borrowing a little sugar or an egg. But I never expected that one of my neighbors, Ben, would play such an important role in my life. Ben is a man of few words, a quiet type who mostly keeps to himself. We've exchanged greetings, but we've never had a deeper conversation. He wasn't the kind of person I would have expected to make a big impact on my life. However, everything changed when I started facing a difficult time in my life. I had been struggling with some health issues, not the kind of thing people often talk about, but enough to make me feel fragile. The constant fatigue and joint pain made me feel like I was slowly losing my strength. I no longer felt like myself. The physical exhaustion weighed heavily on me, and I found myself isolating from my friends and family. I didn't even realize how much I had distanced myself from everyone until something unexpected happened. One afternoon, while I was sitting quietly by the window, I heard a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated. But then the knock came again, louder this time. I stood up and opened the door, and there was Ben, standing in front of me with a slight smile, holding a bag. "Hi, Martha," he said, using my name for the first time. "I thought I'd bring you something. I know you haven't been feeling well lately." His simple gesture took me by surprise. I never expected anyone to notice, but there he was, offering help without hesitation. It wasn't much, just some homemade soup, but it was more than I had anticipated. I hadn't been cooking much lately, too tired to prepare food, and most of the time, I couldn't even bring myself to think about eating. But in that moment, Ben's kindness made me realize how much I had been missing. It wasn't just the soup, it was the act of someone caring, someone noticing when I hadn't noticed myself. The knock on my door was unexpected, especially considering how much time I had spent isolating myself from others. It had been so long since I had really connected with anyone outside of the occasional pleasantries with my neighbors. My life had become a routine of solitude, with my health issues leaving me too fatigued to engage with others. I had started to feel like I was fading into the background, just going through the motions without any real connections or engagement with the world around me. Ben, my neighbor, was not someone I expected to play a big role in my life. He was a quiet man, someone who kept mostly to himself, and our interactions had always been brief, limited to passing greetings or a quick word about the weather. He wasn't someone I thought of as a close friend, and I never expected him to notice how much I had been struggling. Yet there he was, standing at my door with a simple gesture that would change everything. He had a small bag in his hand, and his usual reserved expression was softened by a faint smile. "Hi, Martha," he said, using my name for the first time. "I thought I'd bring you something. I know you haven't been feeling too great lately." I was taken aback by his words. It wasn't that I had expected someone to notice, but there he was, offering help without hesitation. I had been too absorbed in my own struggles to even recognize how isolated I had become. But Ben's quiet act of kindness opened my eyes to what I had been missing. He handed me the bag, explaining that it was just some homemade soup he had made for himself, but thought I might need it as well. It wasn't fancy, just some chicken broth, a little salt, and vegetables, but to me, it meant the world. I hadn't cooked much lately. I was too tired and overwhelmed to even think about preparing food. Ben's simple gesture of bringing me something to eat wasn't just about the soup. It was about someone noticing me, someone who cared enough to reach out without expecting anything in return. As I stood there, holding the bag of soup, I felt a mix of emotions: gratitude, surprise, and even a bit of shame. How had I let myself become so closed off, so disconnected from the people around me? Ben's kindness made me realize just how far I had drifted from everything that truly mattered. It was in that moment that I realized I wasn't alone, and that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can make the biggest difference. After Ben's unexpected visit with the homemade soup, things started to shift for me in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the soup itself, but the deeper meaning behind his gesture. Ben had done something I hadn't even realized I needed. He noticed me. In my world of isolation, I had become so wrapped up in my own struggles that I had stopped noticing the people around me. I had been drowning in physical exhaustion, mental strain, and the overwhelming feeling of being disconnected from everything, including my own emotions. But Ben's simple act of kindness opened a door I hadn't known was closed. As I sat down at my kitchen table, with a bag of soup in my hands, I realized just how much his small gesture had impacted me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. Someone cared enough to check in, to bring me something as simple as homemade soup, without any expectation in return. I wasn't used to this kind of kindness. It made me stop and think. How many times had I ignored the people around me because I was too focused on my own pain? How many opportunities had I missed to connect with others, simply because I had become so self-absorbed in my struggles? Ben's words, "If you ever need anything, someone to talk to, or just a little company, don't hesitate to knock," stayed with me long after he left. It wasn't just a casual offer, it was a genuine invitation to reconnect. It made me realize that I had been retreating from the world and pushing people away without even knowing it. I had closed myself off from the very people who could help me heal. The following days were different. I began to make small changes in my routine, looking for moments to open up and connect with others. I started noticing the little things, those small moments of kindness, from people I had once ignored or overlooked. Ben's visit had done more than just bring me soup. It had brought me back to myself, back to the world outside my door. The realization that someone had cared enough to reach out made me want to reach back, to rediscover the connections I had let slip away. It was a slow process, but I could feel myself becoming less isolated. I didn't have all the answers, and I certainly wasn't healed. But Ben's unexpected help had sparked something in me, a willingness to open up, to let others in, and to start seeing the world again. Sometimes, it's not the grand gestures that make the biggest impact. It's the simple acts of kindness that remind us we're not alone. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to start connecting again. After Ben's visit and the soup, something shifted inside me. I wouldn't say I was suddenly healed, but a lightness started to replace some of the heaviness I had been carrying around. Ben's simple kindness was more than just a kind act. It was the opening of a door I hadn't realized was closed. I had been in such a dark place for so long, focusing only on the physical pain and the mental strain that came with my health issues. But Ben's gesture reminded me that there was still life beyond my struggles, that there was still connection to be had if I just allowed myself to reach out. In the days following Ben's visit, I began to think about him more often. His words, "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to knock," echoed in my mind. At first, I thought it was just a friendly offer, a casual thing people say out of politeness. But as time passed, I realized how much those words meant. Ben didn't just offer help, he offered presence. He showed me that I wasn't invisible, that I wasn't alone, even if I had been hiding away in my own world. Our interactions became a little more frequent after that. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a wave across the yard here, a brief chat about the weather there. But with each exchange, I felt a quiet understanding between us. It wasn't a friendship that needed to be defined or forced. It was simply a connection that grew naturally. It felt like something unspoken had passed between us, a bond that didn't require much but was deeply felt. One particular evening, just days after Ben had brought me the soup, I found myself sitting by my window again, watching the golden light of the setting sun fill the room. I was feeling better physically, but my mind was restless, full of questions and thoughts that I hadn't yet been able to sort through. That's when I heard the knock again. This time, I wasn't surprised. In fact, I almost expected it. The idea that someone cared enough to check on me felt like a lifeline, something to hold on to when everything else felt uncertain. There stood Ben, again, with a small basket of fruit in his hands. His voice was gentle, and he smiled as he said, "I thought you might like something fresh." He had picked up apples, pears, and a couple of peaches from the market, a small but thoughtful gesture. It wasn't the fruit that made the difference. It was the care behind it, the fact that Ben remembered me, that he thought of me even in the midst of his own life. As I took the basket from him, I felt overwhelmed again by his kindness. But it was more than just the fruit. It was the way he showed up without hesitation, the way he asked how I was doing, and the way he listened when I opened up. This small act of care continued to help me realize how disconnected I had become from the world around me, and it gave me the courage to begin reconnecting. Little did I know that Ben's continued acts of kindness would lead to something even deeper, something that would change everything for both of us. After Ben's thoughtful visits with the soup and fruit, I started noticing something in myself that I hadn't realized was missing: connection. His gestures, simple as they were, had a profound impact on me. He didn't just provide food, he provided a sense of care, a reminder that I wasn't invisible. His quiet presence in my life had opened a door I hadn't realized had been closed for so long. I began to reflect on how far I had drifted from the people around me. I had been so wrapped up in my own isolation, avoiding deeper connections, and now I could feel myself beginning to reconnect, even if just in small ways. One of the most powerful things Ben did for me was asking, "Are you okay?" Not just the casual, "How are you?" but a genuine inquiry into my well-being. It was a question I hadn't been asked in a long time, not in a way that made me feel seen. I had been so used to hiding behind my polite smiles, pretending that everything was fine, even when it wasn't. Ben's question cut through that facade. It made me realize how much I had been avoiding facing the truth about my health and my emotions. I had been too afraid to confront them, so I buried them, hoping they would go away on their own. But Ben didn't allow me to keep pretending. His honest concern helped me break down the walls I had built around myself. For the first time in months, I opened up. I told him about the fatigue, the aches, the way I had been isolating myself from everyone. It was hard to admit, but it felt like a release to finally speak the truth out loud, to say that I wasn't okay. What struck me most about that conversation was how Ben listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix anything. He just sat there quietly, letting me say what I needed to say. It wasn't just about giving advice or offering a solution. It was about being there, offering his presence without judgment or expectation. His simple act of listening was, in itself, a form of healing. Ben's support had helped me open up in ways I hadn't thought possible. His kindness wasn't just in his actions, but in his ability to make me feel like I mattered, that my struggles were valid, and that I wasn't alone in them. Slowly, I began to realize that connection, true connection, wasn't just about sharing your struggles. It was about being seen, truly seen, in your vulnerability, and knowing that someone else cares. This wasn't just the beginning of healing for me. It was the start of rediscovering what it meant to be truly present in the world again. After the conversation with Ben, something inside me shifted. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally allowing myself to connect with the world again. Even though it was a slow process, his simple gesture of caring, asking if I was really okay, had made me realize just how far I had isolated myself from everyone. His presence helped me confront the reality I had been avoiding, but it also gave me a sense of possibility. Possibility that I could rebuild connections, not just with others, but with myself. As the days went by, I found myself thinking more about what Ben had said. The more I reflected, the more I realized how much I had been hiding from my own emotions, and how much I had been ignoring the people around me. His honesty and the way he showed up in my life, even without any grand gestures, were changing me. The emotional weight I had been carrying for so long started to feel lighter, not because everything was suddenly fixed, but because I had allowed myself to feel and to reconnect. I began to make small changes. I started noticing the people around me more, the neighbors I had once ignored, the friends I had distanced myself from, and even family members I had subconsciously pushed away. I realized that while I had been so focused on my own struggles, I had been missing out on the connections that truly mattered. I hadn't given myself the chance to reach out to others, to let them in, to accept their help. What Ben had given me wasn't just soup or fruit. It was a reminder of the importance of kindness, of being there for others in small ways, without expectations. He had shown me that even in our darkest moments, the smallest gestures of care can make a huge difference. But more than that, he had shown me that I wasn't alone in my struggles, and that sometimes it's okay to reach out for help. In the days following our conversation, I began to open up more. I found myself feeling less isolated, more connected, and less afraid of what the future might hold. Ben's quiet, consistent kindness had given me the courage to start living again, to open my heart and my life to the world around me. It was a reminder that we all need someone to see us, truly see us, even when we're not sure how to ask for help. And in that realization, I knew that I had the strength to move forward, no longer isolated, but ready to embrace what came next. As time passed after Ben's visits, I found myself reflecting more deeply on the change his kindness had sparked in me. The simple act of him checking in, offering soup, and later fruit, had turned into something more than just a neighborly gesture. It became a bridge that connected us, a thread that slowly pulled me out of my isolation. I had spent so much time hiding from my own emotions and distancing myself from others that I didn't even realize how much I craved connection. But Ben's quiet, consistent presence in my life made me start to see things differently. Our interactions, while still simple, felt more significant with each passing day. At first, I couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed, but I noticed something in myself, a softening, a willingness to be present. The heavy isolation that had weighed on me for so long began to lift, replaced with the understanding that connection, no matter how small, was still possible. It wasn't about dramatic moments or big revelations. It was the small, everyday gestures that mattered most. I began to look forward to the small exchanges we shared. A wave across the yard, a brief conversation about the weather, a shared moment of quiet acknowledgement. These interactions, which once seemed insignificant, now felt like lifelines. I had been so focused on my own struggles, so caught up in the fear of being vulnerable, that I had overlooked these small yet meaningful connections. The more time I spent reflecting, the more I realized that love and connection weren't always about grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes it was about the quiet understanding between two people, the gentle act of showing up for one another. Ben's kindness had taught me that true connection isn't about being perfect or having everything figured out. It's about being present for each other, even in the most subtle ways. In the days following our last conversation, I began to look at my life differently. I realized that I had been so focused on my own struggles that I had missed out on the beautiful simplicity of human connection. It wasn't just the soup or fruit. It was the reminder that there were people around me who cared, and that I wasn't alone in my journey. Slowly but surely, I started to open myself up again. I began to see the world around me, not just the struggles, but the opportunities for connection, for healing, and for growth. Ben's presence in my life had unlocked something deep within me, and I was finally ready to embrace it. The realization that Ben's kindness had sparked such a profound change within me came slowly. It wasn't just about the physical gifts he had brought, soup and fruit, but the deeper connection that had begun to form between us. The more I reflected on our interactions, the more I understood that the shift happening in me wasn't merely external. It was internal, rooted in how I began to perceive myself, my surroundings, and my relationships. Ben had unlocked something I hadn't even known was closed off. He had brought a kind of clarity that I had been missing for years, showing me that kindness and genuine care from others were things I hadn't allowed myself to accept. For so long, I had pushed people away, believing that I could handle things on my own. But Ben's gentle approach, his quiet support, had taught me that there was strength in accepting help, in opening up to others, and in simply being present in the moment. Our connection wasn't something that needed to be rushed or defined. It had grown naturally, and that was what made it feel so right. There was no pressure, no need for grand declarations or sweeping gestures, just simple, everyday exchanges that showed care and consideration. As the days passed, I found myself opening up more, not just to Ben, but to other people as well. I started to engage with my neighbors, reconnect with friends I had drifted away from, and even pick up the phone to call family members. The more I allowed myself to be present with others, the more I realized how much I had been missing by isolating myself for so long. This gradual shift in my mindset was powerful. It wasn't about making dramatic changes all at once. It was about embracing the small, meaningful moments that made me feel connected to the world around me. Ben's actions had reminded me that real connection doesn't always have to be grand or extraordinary. Sometimes it's about the quiet moments of understanding, the simple gestures of kindness, and the willingness to show up for each other without expectation. As the weeks went by, I began to notice that I was no longer as isolated as I once felt. I wasn't alone in my struggles anymore, and I had Ben's quiet support to thank for that. It wasn't just the soup or fruit, it was his ability to make me feel seen, heard, and understood. And in turn, I started to reconnect with myself and with the world again, no longer afraid of what came next, knowing that I didn't have to face it alone.